By yourselves, and I was the one listening. So I know how great it's going to be to spend the night with you both.
Looking forward to it.
No worries. Thank you both for being here. You know, you're both doing some great work in terms of the different things which you've got going on. You know, I know Jim has sent me a load of stuff over Twitter in terms of his high school Champions League program, which is going on. So we'll chat about that a little bit more. And Terry, I've got to know you from lots of different YouTubes and different interviews and podcasts and articles that I've read. But it's nice to actually meet you in person and have this conversation with you. So it's a real privilege to have your time this evening.
Pleased to be here with you.
Good, likewise. Well, Jim, you've just gone a little bit dark on your camera, just to let you know.
Okay, hold on a second. There we go. That should be good.
Yeah, perfect. So the great thing is that we've got this Unsung Hero series, which is great because Jim really wanted to recommend Terry for this conversation. There's a lot to cover, and there's a lot of coaching experience to really take on board from the both of you individually, but collectively, you know, it amasses towards 100 years of coaching experience. When if you were to divide that by the amount of players and sessions that you've done, I think those numbers would be quite incredible in the realistic terms of it. And then you add in the games, and you look at the outcomes which have come with that. That's truly incredible between the both of you. But the really unique thing about this type of conversation is that you two seem to have such a great relationship and partnership between each other. The way that you've advocated, Jim, in terms of Terry, before I even met Terry, is a true testament in terms of, you know, that commitment to another coach, that relationship. And it's something which I've really looked forward to before coming on to this conversation. Again, I think that's going to be one of the exciting things which we get to unpack as we have this conversation.
It's a classic case of just finding a common denominator, a common bond. Two guys that didn't know each other from Adam. You know, all of a sudden now we're together in this project and can't get enough of each other in the process. Can't get out of each other's way right now.
So how did you two actually come into contact? How long have you known each other?
Jim, you want to do that?
Sure. We've known each other, Terry, about 2 years now, maybe. Ooh, something like that.
That might be a stretch. Maybe so.
Maybe it's more like 18, 20 months, something like that.
A little bit short of 2 years. Yeah.
So the high school Champions League movement is what has brought us together. And there's a person that by the name of Perry Vanderbeck. He is a U.S. soccer legend. He played for the U.S. I think 23 times, 570 pro games, coached at MLS level, at USL level. Has been on the United States Soccer Board of Directors. He was a captain of the 1980 U.S. Olympic team that was denied going to the Moscow Olympics in 1980, unfortunately, because they had a chance to do something. Just a really super guy. And when we do our Champions League draw here in Tampa Bay, we always invite local sort of soccer celebrities to come and do the draw with us. We do it at a local sports pub, and we invited Perry. Perry came out. Now, Perry was born and raised in St. Louis, where Terry is. St. Louis is considered the soccer sort of capital of the U.S. That's where Perry came from, and he went to Tampa to play to play out his career, and he stayed here, right? So Terry came into this draw, and he looked at it for about 10 minutes, and he said, we have got to get this high school Champions League to St. Louis. This has got St. Louis written all over it. And he said, as soon as we're finished with this draw, I'm going to go home and email Terry Michler, Greg Keller, Mike Gavain, Vince Drake. Those are names of some of the legendary coaches, not only in St. Louis, but in the U.S. that Perry came up with in St. Louis. And he said, I want to tell them about this because I think they're going to like it. And then I'm going to connect you, Jim. He's talking to me. I'm going to connect you with these guys. And then I'm just going to get out of the way. And that's how we came together.
I think that's fantastic because you're looking at the modernization of a program and looking at the growth from something which has existed for a long period of time, but taking that into a modern context. And it allows you to form two great relationships between each other, capitalizing on what your experience and skills are to really take, these groups of players, which are the current foundations, the current future, and applying that to an even further context from your experiences. So I'm really interested to hear more about the high school program and unpacking that a little bit more as we get to move on. But, it'd be great to have introductions for you both separately, and then we'll unpack a little bit more as we get into the conversation. So, I have some great background information on the both of you, between whether it's been academy, high school, whether it's been college, whether it's been coaching men's football, whether it's been a bit of teaching. But you're the experts, you're the professionals, you're the legends in the room right now, and your careers better than anyone else. So, Terry, if we start with you for an introduction about yourself, that would be fantastic.
Okay, before I get into that, though, I want to add on one point to Jim's introduction about the Champions League and our meetings. St. Louis soccer, high school soccer in particular, soccer in general, high school soccer in particular, has gone through a significant change over the last 10, 12 years with the introduction of the United States Development Academies. And then that has filtered into the local clubs also having academies. And the conditions for playing academy soccer currently in St. Louis is that the player has to choose between high school or academy. So, that takes a significant hit in the quality level for sure, and the population of the high school players. So this Champions League could not have come to us at a better time because we needed something to kind of reinvigorate the interest in our local high school programs. And this sure did it. We just finished our first year last year, but we started off with a bang. I mean, we had great support all the way through, and our championship game was an overflow back in the old school day type of atmosphere. People were in the stands, lining along the sidelines, and it was a great game. I mean, everybody that left is dying for the next opportunity to come back and see that again. So, yeah, it couldn't come at a better time and satisfy our needs to reinvigorate our game. So, myself, I'm going to be 78 years old here in a couple of weeks. I've been at the school at CBC High School in St. Louis for 54 years total, 48 years as a teacher, 52 as a coach. I missed 2 years, one with COVID and one had hospitalization. I've been extremely fortunate and blessed over the years to have some incredibly talented, motivated players with high ambition. I've had players just putting together a little celebration event and doing a PowerPoint, and some of the highlight people that pass through our program as I prepare this is really incredible. I mean, we have Don Draghi, for instance, is one that I would mention. He was in my first two teams back in 71 and 72. He's played professionally back in the NASL days with Perry Vanderbeck and stuff. But Donald played on 7 different professional teams, which usually as an American player in the leagues, you got one chance. If it didn't work out, you're dead in the water. But he was good enough that he could go from team to team under different circumstances and always find somebody that's still interested in wanting him. So that was huge. We had one of our graduates was Mike Freitag, was the coach at Indiana University, winning a national championship. He was in between the Yeagley eras. Another one, Tom Heineman, is currently assistant coach with Chicago Fire in the MLS. Previous to that, he was the USA under 17 youth head coach for the youth of the U.S. under 17. So just a few examples. I mean, we've been Daryl Duran, another one, played indoor soccer in the professional leagues over here. He was a player coach, and finally was the coach, outstanding player. So those are, examples of the kind of players that we've been fortunate to have over the years. My own personal background and experience really hit a highlight when I got interested in the Dutch soccer with Clockwork Orange back in the day of total football, 1974 era. And I followed them as much as I could from as far away as possible, unfortunately, but I was able to stay in contact with their concepts as best I could. And then in 1997, I actually got a chance to go over to Holland. I went through the joint efforts of the NSCAA, which is our American Coaching Association, and the KNVB, which is the Dutch Federation, and was able to spend 10 days in country in a small group of 10 coaches with 2 Dutch coaches. And we had these coaches that we had were incredibly wonderful. They were knowledgeable, well respected. They pretty much had the keys to the castle in that country, and there was no place that we could not go. And when we went, we were very well received. But one of the things that I took away from that, and this has kind of been with me forever, is that one of the introductory remarks that they made to us was, we've just returned from Malaysia and South Korea. And our function, our job, our goal is to go wherever we're needed and preach soccer. So here's what we want to do. We want to tell you all that we know to help you improve your game. And if, then that also, the 2 things, we give you what we know, then we need to go find out more and stay on top of the game. So, when I came back, first thing I did was I had a free clinic. I had handouts with the activities that we did for the people that showed up for the clinic. And that was in contrast to what previously was going on when coaches would go abroad to different places, different locations, and visit teams. They'd come back and play the game. I've got a secret, and they'd lock everything up in their vault and share nothing with anybody, and you can't make the game better when you do that. So my goal in this Champions League is a great output of that, is a way to enhance the game and move the game forward, and keep the beautiful game alive and well for as much as we can, for as many people as we can. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you for that, Terry. I think that's such a great insight in terms of the journey which you've had. And I read about your time during Dutch soccer and the influence which it's had on you and what you've been able to take away. And I know the impact of total football, and obviously that's still very contemporary in terms of the high school program which you've touched upon already. And Jim, now over to you if you don't mind.
Sure. First, I have to say, Terry always underplays himself. So, Coach, you need to know, Coach Luca, that in the United States, high school soccer annals, Terry Michler is the godfather. He has coached more games, almost 1,500, has more wins, over 1,000, 52 years, and there is, when you think high school soccer in the United States, you think Terry Michler. And Terry's not going to say that, and but it needs to be said, and we're honored that he's a part of our movement. Myself, I'm a retired 39-year teacher of physical education in kindergarten through 8th grade, and soccer coach 43 years, high school soccer coach 36 years, and toward the it's funny. Terry and I both have been greatly influenced by the Dutch method, learning through playing, learning by playing games, the 4v4 method, the idea of creating field sizes and restrictions in games to bring out certain parts of a game. And so there's just a general idea of learning through playing permeated my PE teaching career. And I followed that and had great success with it and really enjoyed it. And of course, I've always been, as a coach, I've always tried to get my players to take on responsibility, to be creative, to think for themselves, to not be afraid to make mistakes, all of those kind of things that we hope. And I have met with some success, some not, but so philosophically, we're in the same place. But when I look even. I don't see Terry. I have to look up to see Terry because he's up there. But having said that, that's my story. In the last year of my high school coaching career, is when the high school Champions League started, and so that was 2017, 18, and then we started the high school Champions League. Got a lot of coaches here in the local Tampa Bay area excited about it. They were kind enough, those coaches, to ask me to remain involved, even though I was retiring and moving away from actively coaching. And I was happy to be asked because I was excited to, but I didn't think it was my place to stay unless I was asked. So I'm glad that I was, and so that has brought Terry and I and a bunch of other coaches from the United States together, as well as you, Coach.
Yeah, it's been great because, the first time I got to meet you, Jim, was when you inboxed me about the high school program, right?
Yes.
The Champions League program, and that in itself, extending to a coach in Britain, for example, shows the reach and the passion that you have behind it. And the more that it reaches, and part of the podcast is to promote that tonight and talk about the great work which you're doing, because that's how you build a program. That's how you continue to push the message which you're doing, especially if you started it in Tampa Bay, and how many other regions can pick that up, how many more people can you network with, right? And it's something which grabbed my attention straight away, because I was like, what an interesting concept. I've spoken to so many different coaches from the US, and not once have they ever mentioned a program like this, right? So it's unique in terms of what you two have done, and that growth of it, which is something which I was really intrigued by from the moment I read that first message. And it's been great that you still remain a part of that program despite retiring, and still have that energy and passion to really be part of it now, 7 years later, after, what was happening in 2017, 2018, and everything that you've continued to do beyond then, because you could have given a couple of years advised on it and then completely retired altogether. But yet 2025, here we are still having these discussions, right? And that's something which I love and sits in the back of my mind, is that one day I'm very scared to retire, because I don't know if I want to retire one day. But yet I get to see both of you who are, 78 years of age, and, later on in your life, and I feel very harsh saying that, in that real contrast, right? But you get to see what you're still doing, and that ignites, passion in me to continue that when I know I'm going to be at your age, and I know I'm not going to want to retire. I'm not going to want to walk away from these things. So it's that hard thing to walk away. And even though you are getting older, and life has thrown some curveballs at you, right? Do either of you even have a plan to walk away altogether?
I don't think walking away is the proper wording. I think we're just walking in a different direction right now. So we're keeping the passion for the game alive. And I guess it's fortunate, I'd speak for myself, that I have so much more time now than I would have had before that I can devote to this. And I'm a huge advocate of quality and standards. And, the Champions League, there's outside of the World Cup, and even beyond that, I think the Champions League might have more clout and credibility and stature than the World Cup, because the Champions League is every year. The World Cup is every 4 years. So, the pressure for teams to get, that's the goal of every high quality team at the beginning of the year, is to be in the Champions League the following year. So that's the stature and status of that. It's that competitive and demanding and rewarding. So, to be able to put that on our level and to put it in the same context, and that's where I come in. I'm really big on not just having this as another tournament, but to have it and represent what the Champions League is all about. That it's got to be high quality, it's got to be really competitive, it's got to be meaningful, and it's really got to stand above everything else. So we've been able to do that so far, and it's through Jim's efforts. He's probably got a list of at least 20 other cities now that he's been in contact with that are interested in expanding it. So we went ahead and produced a logo for the United States Champions League beyond St. Louis and beyond Tampa Bay. We want to try and get this thing as far wide spread as we can. So we're already ahead of the game with a logo. Now we just got to fill in more of the contestants, so to speak. And the nice thing about it is it's not a kind of a competition where you're actually going to compete nationally, but it's a concept what we're trying to do is promote the concept coast to coast, and get more, because everybody suffers the same thing with these academy choices that kids have to make, and everybody goes to school, everybody goes to high school. That's just part of the rite of passage, and from that you have your memories. You get together through the years for alumni gatherings and whatnot. And you always talk about the big events, and usually sports are always one of the bigger events. So to take that away from people and the opportunity to play, in a competitive environment where you're representing your school, your family, your community, it's a lot to think about there. And when you balance that against the small percentage of players that make it into the professional ranks, you have to ask the question, what are these kids losing in the meantime? They're losing out on the opportunity and the memories that the high school experience can provide them. And I think that's the point that, we really want to get across to some of these people, because the club situation is meant for the top of the line, highest level player. In St. Louis, we have 4 club academies. There's no way in the world we got anywhere close to that number of quality of players, So the majority of those kids, most all of them, are missing out on an opportunity that they could have had if they would have chosen to stay and play high school. So I don't know how I got off on all that tangent.
No, that's good stuff, Terry. No, but Coach, but what you were talking about retirement, it's really great to hear you saying these things. And I remember feeling the same way as I neared the end of the line, thinking, do I even want to retire? And if I do, what will I do? Will I walk? How will I do it? Well, this is what I'm going to say to you, Coach Luca. If you think you're busy now, wait till you retire. Because there is, as Terry said, you have time. You can do as much as you want or as little as you want, but you don't have to, you can make your own schedule around what it is that you want to do. That's the beautiful thing about it. And, there's not a switch that flips in your mind and it's the sort of old man switch. And now you're like an old man. No, you're the same person. You're the same. If you didn't know when your birthday was, you wouldn't know how old you were because you still feel the same. You still have as much energy. And and the other thing that I want to get across too is there's something super cool about being in this position because for all these years that I coached, I did everything possible to throw every waking minute into answering this question: how can I get my team to win? How can I get my team to progress? But now my focus is not just one team, but it's all the teams. And it is how can I help all of the teams have a better environment within which to play? Terry Michler spent 52 years focused on the question, how do I get CBC to the next state championship? And now Terry Michler is taking his rightful place as the leading soccer coach in America, high school soccer coach, and he's helping lead this movement on how do we make high school soccer better and more attractive to players who are coming up against a choice put there by these academies, which is, do you play high school or do you play the academy? What we would like to see, Coach, and I think I speak for Terry as well, we want to see everybody work together. We want to see everybody go hand in hand and find a way to create the best opportunity for development that doesn't close off any one part of it. But the reason that the High School Champions League is important is because soccer has become a money pursuit in the United States. I think that this is not just limited to the US. I think there's a lot of global element to that. But when I say a money pursuit, it's a money pursuit. Pro soccer is in the UK and other places because it's about developing players so you can sell them on the market and get money back to develop your team. That's a different money pursuit. Here, it's pay to play. And it's about getting as many people to pay as much as possible to put their kids through 10 years of youth soccer, 10, 12 years of youth soccer. And it is choking the game in this country. It's choking the game. And the High School Champions League is not a money pursuit. There is nobody making money on the High School Champions League. there is no entry fee to the high school Champions League. It is that we operate out of 5 principles, and the number one principle is the Champions League is free for participating teams that earn the right to be in it. So we are able to spend our retirement years not just promoting a tournament, but promoting the underlying principles that the tournament is based on. And these underlying principles, they're free to play, merit-based inclusion, metro-based competition. There's too much travel going on in the US just to play soccer. Coach collaboration, which is what your Reflective Coach podcast is all about, is coach collaboration, and student athlete empowerment, because we found that it shouldn't be the ones that get empowered should not be the ones that can afford to get empowered. It should be everybody should have the opportunity to be empowered. They just have to be good enough. So if you think of it that way, then you think, okay, this is way more than money. This is a cause. It's a mission to promote these principles. But then to have the principles wrapped up in a tournament or an event like the High School Champions League is super cool, because, like Terry so eloquently said, it's connected to the Champions League and all that it stands for. It is a return to a merit basis for inclusion, not if you have the money you're included, or if you know somebody you're included, but no, there are objective metrics, and if you meet those metrics, you get an invitation. If you're not good enough, you don't get it. That's all it is. And underlining those principles is going to make the game better in the US, we think.
I love those principles. I love the way you talk about them, and I've made a little note of them here because I think they're so important in terms of what you say there. And I liked what you said about metro-based competition, because when you look at the distance between America, the number of states, and then you break that down into cities, etc., that's a massive area that one player could travel, right? And one of the things that has become so apparent to me every time I've spoken to a coach from the US is the major disconnect between the programs across the US, right? Whether that's high school, academy, whether that's college soccer, and again at university, and how different that looks, and that major disconnect, I think, has been a massive loophole in terms of how many players are falling through the gap. Now, the US is something which I'm massively fond of as a country, and I'm fond of the growth of the program. So every time I speak to a different coach and I think of the prospective future which is ahead, I think it's a very exciting time for US soccer, and even in 10 years it'll be exciting, and it's something which has always interested me, right? But it's about, when you think about the amount of different states across America and different demographics, you think how different Tampa Bay is compared to, say, centralized New York, compared to how different that is to, down in the South, compared to, the growth of the program in different regions, then the players are a huge impact there. And it's about, the most diverse communities right across the US. How many of those quality players which exist, who might have been very good at street football and have the potential to play, whether at club, high school, etc., but they've never been tapped into because their families simply can't afford it, right? So how many of those quality players are being lost, and therefore the generations of US soccer? Because when you look at the size of the US in terms of its stature, how many players, how many athletes, how many different programs you have, then it's madness that the US soccer isn't dominating world football right now.
Yeah, you're right there. It starts at the top, and that's why we're not dominating, because we don't have an organized plan. Tell you what we do have, though. We have more and more former high-level players, international players, speaking out against the current setup, and begging for people to listen and to find a better way of doing it. Right now, I made 3 notes here as you were talking. First one, our structure in the U.S. is similar to what you could call alphabet soup. Every day there's a new group, new organization coming out, with their letters and stuff to represent this or that. There's too many factions that don't want to come back together. Too many little kingdoms that want their own little slice of the pie. Mostly they want the whole pie. They don't want a slice of it. They want the whole pie, And it's, unfortunately, it doesn't start with the good of the game. It doesn't start with that. It starts with the good of my pocketbook, unfortunately. Years ago, the U.S. hired Carlos Queiroz. You may or may not know that name, Portuguese guy, and to organize an activity called Project 2010. And they hired him after I think it was the '94 World Cup, or prior to, one or the other. Anyway, he traveled the country, the U.S., to get an idea of the lay of the land and the landscape for soccer. And Project 2010, his mission statement was to win the World Cup, for the U.S. to win the World Cup in 2010. Whoa, we missed that mark badly, didn't we? But his plan was to have it organized locally, statewide, regionally, nationally, and it would be staffed with staff that bought into the same principles from one level to the next. Kind of like, when I go to Holland quite a bit, taking like 17 different trips over there over the years, taking groups over, whatnot. But I study Ajax's system quite extensively, and their idea is that they could tell you who their third line number 10 is and in what age group. They know exactly what's coming up because they all adhere to the same kind of system and philosophy. Project 2010 was going to be like that, basically. But it stayed on the shelves forever, and somebody finally knocked the dust off of it and looked at it.
Excuse me, guys. I got to jump out of the interview right now. Keep going.
So Project 2010 never really materialized. The closest that we came to it was this development of the Development Academy. That was the closest thing. So what looked like it would be a good plan. And granted, our country is huge. And as you said, was a lot of different diversity in terms of philosophy and approach. But this was one that was going to bring it all together. And then the third thing I have down here is the grassroots element, which is what you talked about at the end of your statement. Dealing with the underserved. I mean, we have so many immigrants just in our own city that come with a passion for soccer. Again, when I go to Holland and visit, the thing that strikes me is the number of mini courts that they have over there. And there's one that I always reference because it's in an apartment complex in the shape of a U. Okay, it's about 3-story apartment complex in the shape of a U. And guess what's right in the middle of that U? A mini pitch. Nobody has to go anywhere except out their front door, to play. It's so convenient. But as you said too, the U.S. is so diverse and spread out and large that transportation, even not even talking about leaving the city to play games, getting around in the city to practice, to get training, for some of the people is out of the question because they don't have any means of transportation, much less the financial aspect to pay for it. So, yeah, there's a lot that we could do to improve ourselves, but it's going to take a lot of cooperation and a reality check. It's going to take a big reality check.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think that's the difference, is that cooperation which seems to be lacking between the different systems. And as you said there, and I like the way that you put it, it's alphabet soup and the different kingdoms which are being carved out. And it seems that way from the outset, from me, being over here and not being an expert on US soccer compared to yourself, right, Terry? But it seems that a lot of people have a real disconnect, and those players are really missing out, especially when there's that pay play. And I see players really promoting themselves, which I'm a huge advocate of, because they're really doing so well to push themselves. And when I see players with thousands of followers, for example, and what they're able to generate for themselves, that journey they go through is incredible. But also in a way, I feel for them because the amount of pressure that they have to put on themselves to try and gain a social media presence, to build a profile, to try and promote themselves at 15, 16, to try and get into these further programs and to try and secure places, I think is a real cutthroat sort of environment. And yes, we have that similar here in the UK, but what is different here is you might have some young players, say 15, 16, you have a group of 30, and if they don't perform, then you pick out the best players. So you might pick the top 15 and they get given a scholarship then, and everyone knows that, and it's a very simple, straightforward program. But you have players who are sort of competing at these big trial events regionally, and there's hundreds of players there, and there's lots of soccer coaches, and they're picking out who they want. And I suppose that is very different to what we do. And that can be a very difficult thing, because I might be a 15, 16-year-old planning to go next week, for an event day in Miami. And then I have to try and compete to be noticed by some of these coaches to try and be cherry picked. Now, for a young player, that can be an incredible experience, but also one of the most difficult that they can experience before they've even turned a young adult, for example.
Well, you bring up another great point, and the globalization of soccer now is such that it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, and you can't really gauge yourself against whatever competition you can see, because that all of a sudden somebody's going to show up from who knows where that you don't know, and he's going to be the one to take your spot. In the U.S., our college system has changed radically over the more recent years. The university system of soccer used to be a major pathway for players to get to the professional ranks. And now, the way that the university systems are, we have a free transfer concept now called, anyway, I forgot the name, what they call it, but players can transfer from school to school with no penalty. Used to be you had to sit out a year when you did that. Now you can do it freely. Second thing is the internationals have come over and starting to dominate the college scene. In our most recent Final Four this past year, the four teams, one team from Denver, University of Denver, had all local kids. They had 5 international players. Indiana University was in. They had like 8 or 10 internationals. Marshall and Vermont, I think Marshall had 22 out of 25 players that were internationals. And Vermont, who never had a real soccer history about them, won the championship, and they had about 50% internationals. So even locally with our St. Louis team, we're starting to get back to more local kids, but we got away from that for a while. But when you start building, if you either build it up from the bottom or build it from the top down. But whenever U.S. players, and in our case it's U.S., in your case it's British players, whenever they're deprived of an opportunity to play at a higher level because somebody is coming in from out of country, that affects your national team at the end of the day. When you can't, these kids aren't getting the proper opportunities to get the competitive level and gain those experiences. At the end of the day, it's going to cost your national team. It only has to.
Yeah, I see that, and I think I'm in a similar position where we get to see that with some of the players in the restructure of the country which I'm from, which is Wales, and we're in a major restructure because we have England and Wales which are right next to each other, and if you want to go and play in England, and that can be sort of half an hour from where some of the players live in the region, they have to do an international transfer to get England clearance and vice versa if they want to come back. And for some of these players to get the opportunity to go play in England, they play in what's called the Junior Premier League. And that is a points-based system. It's very competitive. It starts from underage. You can see league tables. You can see all of that. Whereas here in Wales, we don't have a competitive league up until the age of 14. When we start 4v4 under 7s with no goalkeeper, then under 8 you introduce the goalkeeper, and then the format increases over the years. So you can still be playing 9v9 under 12s and under 13s, and then you fully go 11 aside under 14s, which is a really interesting sort of concept in terms of comparing those countries, how they compete. But the big thing is with England that they have these regional academies which players can go into from the FA, and they have clubs which players can progress into. So whether that be Man United, whether that be Man City, whether that be Liverpool, Chelsea, Charlton Athletic, Millwall, right? There's so many different academies for them to progress into. And then there's a greater scope because we have the 92 professional league teams, and then underneath that you have the semi-pro teams, and then underneath that then you have your higher tier grassroots. So there's plenty of opportunity. You're looking from anywhere from 92 to 200 clubs which players could look at, right? So the opportunity is quite wide. Now here in Wales we don't have that. We lack a professional stature of clubs. So I believe we have a total of 12 professional teams in our league, and that is the top league, and then anything else under that would typically be semi-pro, and then again your top tier clubs which your grassroots and will be of a good standard, but nothing compared to professional, especially in England, right? So then these players have to try and compete across what we call regional academies here in Wales, where the competition then is very tough. But you're missing out on all those players, especially as they become deprived of those opportunities, because we don't have the number of opportunities compared to England. So our talent pool is not as wide as what England's is at the moment, and that's why we're missing. And I suppose I can compare that to the same in the US at the moment, because again, there's so many players which are falling through the massive loopholes at the moment. I think that's a really interesting concept from the US soccer. But I liked what you said earlier on, Jim, about that 4v4, because it's similar to what we're doing here in Wales, and it's a real interesting approach to football, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No doubt, no doubt. And we have so many different ways of creating these quote unquote pathways or development systems here. The thing about the US is it is so massive, just unbelievably massive, hard to get your arms around, massive. And there will be people in the US system, they will say things like, if there's a good player, we know about them. Nobody slips through the cracks. We know all the good players. Well, the thing that everybody that looks at the US system has to understand is the people that are talking about these things are talking about it from there's a financial motive underneath it. For example, if I'm a player development person for a club, right? And they're paying me well to do that. And they're paying me with money that parents pay to have their kids play. And I come out and I make a public statement, something like this. Hey, there's a lot of players slipping through the cracks. We need to make sure and do a better job of getting, well, people are going to say, what are we paying you for if there's players slipping through the cracks? We don't, why are you the person who's in charge of developing players if this is what's happening? So there's a financial incentive to make statements like, oh no, we know who all the players are. Nobody's slipping through the cracks. Everything's covered. The truth of the matter is there are so many good players, whether they're playing in 4v4, whether they're playing in recreational teams, competitive teams, or outside the system in, like for instance, there are many communities of foreign-based communities that have their own leagues, their own recreational leagues, their own adult leagues. Here in the Tampa Bay area, there are no less than 5 men's adult soccer leagues that are Hispanic based. There are two Mexican leagues, an Ecuadorian league, and 2 other leagues that are sort of a mixture of all those. And that's just in Tampa Bay. And then each of them has kids that are playing on recreational teams. Those dads who play on those those teams, those men's amateur teams, they coach their own kids. They don't sign their kids up for hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars to go into a competitive system. They have their own leagues, and those kids are good, right? And for somebody to come and say, "Oh no, we know who all the players are," I don't buy that, coach. I don't buy that at all. So the thing that the US is all about is how gigantic it is. So if it's so big, then doesn't it make sense to find a way, maybe not to include everybody, but not to actively say no to somebody? Okay. Terry said something very profound early on. He said, everybody goes to high school. That's a fact. In the United States, it is against the law not to go to school. You have to go to school, right? And many of these high schools, not every high school has a team, but many of them do. And they have populations of kids that have 2 things in common. Number one, they grew up in a football culture and they're good. And number 2, they cannot afford competitive soccer, high-end competitive soccer, but they can play for their high school. These kids are everywhere, everywhere. And so, what we're trying to do is just fill in one more part of the system. And we're not asking anything. We're not charging money. We're not trying to cut into anybody's time. We want to work with people, but we just don't want to say, we don't want to have people say, no, your existence is a threat. You need to stop. We need to keep kids from you. We need to keep kids. We're trying to develop kids to play as professionals, to go into hostile environments, to get yelled at by crowds, to deal with the pressures of. But the one thing we can't do is let them play high school soccer, because that's going to mess them up. Well,
It's interesting, Jim. That I only play off your point there real quick, because one of the arguments that Landon Donovan and Tim Howard made in their podcast was that they were criticizing the current national team for not having any real fight about them. And one thing that high school soccer provides is rivalries, and you fight for the right to represent your place and for bragging rights. And academies play one game a week, and they probably have to travel to play somebody, and whoever they're playing, they don't know anything about them. They don't have any vested interest in it. It's just a game to play. But high school, almost every game you play, there's something at stake. In St. Louis, we get very good media coverage every day. The schedules are posted. Following day, all the results are posted. There's regular articles in the paper highlighting the games and the key players. There's TV coverage, periodically. People know what's going on with high school soccer. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, my team's playing a championship tournament game at the soccer park, which is the place in St. Louis. And we were on a secondary field, a backfield. And on the main field was an academy game between the local St. Louis Scott Gallagher Academy and a Chicago Academy team. And this was a Friday night, and it happened to be a homecoming night for our school. Our game was absolutely, totally packed. They had bleachers running the length of the field from flag to flag, about 6 rows deep. Those were full. Kids were standing around each corner flag, in numbers 3 and 4 deep, to watch the game. On the main field where the academy game was going on, they could have introduced the people in the stands less time than it took to introduce the players. There's a great example right there, the interest level. But yeah, I think that we've got something really good here at our disposal with the High School Champions League, and we're really trying to build on it for the right reasons.
And when it comes to this Champions League format, which you're trying to instill this program, now here in Wales, if a club wanted to run a competitive football league or cup, right, they wouldn't get the right regulation for it. They'd be shut down and it'd be told, no, this couldn't take place. Now, for this to be private, then the teams would have to enter privately and the individual. So that would be a very different program in terms of trying to work cohesively with us, right? So when it comes to US soccer and how they regulate these types of competitions, do you get any backlash? Is there anything that you have to get around when it comes to that national governing body, or is that something where across the US there's a bit more free will to instill these kind of competitions?
It's a great question, Terry. You want me to have a go at this one?
And Jim, you can fill in. Basically, in the U.S., every state has their own high school association that's a governing body. So we have 50 states. You got 50 governing bodies, and they have no connection with U.S. soccer. So they're separate entities. So every state has to decide their own way of doing it. All right, Jim.
But they are an administrative body, and they are a governing body. So whether they're a soccer governing body or not, governing bodies have certain behaviors and certain ways that you expect them to exert their influence, exert their power. So here's the beauty of the High School Champions League, coach. The one thing that these governing bodies do is they expect coaches to make their own schedules. Okay, so as when Terry and I were coaching in the middle of a season or right toward the end of a season, we would already begin to think, okay, who are we going to play next year? Let's start getting our schedule made. So the state governing body does not do that. They couldn't do that. It's too much work. So coaches make their own schedules. It's just a natural thing. Just like governing bodies in Wales, they don't tell each individual club who to play or what night to play them. They make their own schedules. Where they get involved is in ruling over competitions. Okay. But what the High School Champions League is this is why the fourth principle of the High School Champions League is so crucial, the coach collaboration principle. It is really an agreement, an understanding, an unwritten understanding among high school coaches that they are going to get together and they are going to they're going to determine based on objective metrics who gets an invitation into this quote unquote Champions League. Then they're going to throw the names into a hat, pull them out and create groups of 4 or whatever the number is based on, the given metro area that's doing it. And then based on who you're in the group with, you now are going to schedule those 3 other teams on your regular season schedule the following season. So this is already something you have to do, is make your own schedule. The governing body doesn't tell you who to play. You can play anybody as long as they're another high school. So if the high school coaches get together and say, okay, we'll make our own schedules, but we'll make them according to this group that we've created. That's who we'll schedule. So it's not as though we're hiding this from the state association. We're not. We're very open about it. But what we're saying to the state association is we don't need to set aside a weekend for this. We don't need to set aside special facilities. We don't need to set aside anything. This is just the coaches agreeing to work together to create this Champions League out of their regular season schedules. This doesn't replace the year-end state tournament that the state governing body is concerned with. The state governing body in every state the big thing is the state championship, and everything builds up to the state championship. We are complementary to the state championship. And remember, the third principle is the metro basis of this. We are not attempting to be a statewide competition. We're attempting to be a local competition. And then so the state governing bodies really don't have any problem with what we're doing. Now, the one thing that we do here in Tampa Bay is we have our semifinals and our finals at one location. And the state has simply asked us this: make sure you have insurance. So with the money that we raise, we buy insurance for the day of those games. And as long as we've got insurance, as long as we're not, making up crazy rules, as long as we're following the rules of the game, 11 versus 11, it's the same time limit, etc. They have no problem with what we're doing. So this is where the principles really come in, though. If we were, for example, a fee-based tournament, then the state might say, hey, we need a percentage of that fee. But we're not a fee-based tournament. When Terry talked about the great final that they had in St. Louis, admission to the final was free for fans to come and watch. We're not charging. The Tampa Bay Rowdies, professional team here in Tampa, they allow us to play our final in their stadium. And they don't charge admission. People can come and watch. So there's no reason for the state to have to get involved in what we're doing. But like I said, we don't hide it. We want them to know what we're doing because we're above board. But because we don't have a financial motive, there's no reason for them to get in our way.
It's a very interesting concept in terms of how that all works together. And what's interesting to me is the fact that the American Football Association don't regulate these different states and how they look at their programs. So originally you can see where the problem starts from the top and how they don't regulate football, soccer, and how so many players are falling through the cracks because all the programs might be, aligned, not aligned, and they're very different. So then that discourse across US soccer creates a bit of a problem. And that's what we had here in Wales before there was a big revamp from the FAW, which is the Welsh Football Association, because some teams were doing 9v9, some were doing 11v11, some were doing 7v7, and the FAW said, no, that needs to stop. Everyone in these regions need to be doing this. And there's still some little leeway in terms of some areas because of the lack of teams, therefore lack of players. So there is different dispensation based upon that in geographical areas. But that is quite interesting. So if you had a player who was signed on for a club, for example, are they not permitted to play high school football whatsoever then?
I'm going to start this answer, Terry, and I'm going to let you pick it up. It depends. Terry, you just go ahead and take that one.
What was the question again?
So if you had the player who was signed on for a club, are they not permitted to play high school soccer at all?
Only if they're signed up for the club academy program. Otherwise, the normal club's schedule does not conflict with the high school schedule. Now, here's another interesting point about the U.S. though. That in the U.S. there are 3 different seasons that high school soccer can be played. In our area in St. Louis, in the Midwest, we play in the fall up till about Thanksgiving. There are other areas that play through the winter because their climate is conducive for that. It's a warm climate. And I think in some areas they play in the spring. So there's 3 different seasons. So in our case, it works out good because the clubs take a break during the fall because they give way to the high school. When the high school finishes, the clubs start. So we get the kids basically from like August through November. And the clubs pick them up then right away as soon as they can. They basically have them December through July. And we've always been able to work hand in hand over all the years, Am I still on? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you cut out there for about 10 seconds or so.
Heck? Hello, am I still on?
Hello, yes, you are, Terry.
Luca, am I on?
Yes, you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can't hear myself. Okay.
Yeah, I missed about 10 seconds of what you said. Sorry, Terry.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good. You got the gist of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the interesting thing is, that difference between club football and signing on and that soccer high school program, because here we're very much based upon a club-based system. So players might go and sign for their local club in the area, but they're not regulated in terms of high school. There's no official high school program. It depends on every high school if there's a game available and what the interest of the high school is. So if a high school doesn't have that much interest in football, they won't offer as many games. If one school is, they'll offer 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games. There's no sort of set program for our high school program over here. It's all based upon what we do in the clubs, and then the academy will be its own separate program. So there is a big difference between high school, club, and academy here. But the club football will mostly feed into the academy football, and then academy football hopefully into professional football. So we were just talking about club soccer, high school soccer, and
I think we're unique in the U.S. for having the high school sports scene. We have high school sports are huge in the U.S. It covers a wide range of sports, and that's part of the educational program here is to use sports as a tool to learn behavior, sportsmanship, and all that good stuff. So yeah, we're unique in that. I understand the club mentality, club approach around the rest of the world, but we're different. We're very different about that.
That's something I'm a big admirer of, is how big your program is in the high schools, and how that fits into teaching, how that fits into a student's lifestyle. So if you're a teacher, which you were like yourself, right, Terry, how does soccer fit into teaching? How does it fit into the school? How does life look when you are a teacher / a high school soccer coach?
Well, yeah, one of the conditions is that the kids have to maintain grades. They have to maintain a certain level of grades. If they don't maintain their grades, they're not eligible to play. So that's motivating right there. Discipline the same way. If their behavior gets them in trouble. So yeah, that's the one thing about high school. I think it's significantly different than club. There's a lot more restrictions or guidelines placed on the kids. There's a lot more accountability. And that's part of the the educational approach and educational process of athletics. That's why athletics are part of the high school program, so that kids can use their talent in different ways and still have to behave themselves and maintain standards. So there's a lot of value there, a lot of value.
Yeah, I completely agree. And when it comes to it, do you have to be a teacher to be a high school soccer coach then?
No, not anymore because of the shortage of teachers and coaches. It used to be. It used to be that you had to be employed by the school as a teacher to coach. That was the way it was when I started back in the day. But most recently, it's changed now. Uh, they like if you have some kind of a degree, but that's not mandatory. There's just a shortage of coaches. But you do have to go through a couple of pre-programs to get clearance in different ways to make sure that you're not of any risk or ill behavior. You know, any risk to the kids that you're dealing with. So they do check you out pretty thoroughly.
So if you're just a high school coach then and you're not a teacher, would you just go in for your training sessions and then do you just do your games? Do you just work those session based if you're just a high school soccer coach?
Yeah, like a subcontract. They pay you whatever fee they have set aside for you. All you do is coach. Yeah, you're just full-time coach. Not full-time pay, but full-time coach.
Well, that's pretty interesting that you're a full-time coach. And if you're a teacher, then do you have hours based around what you'd be doing for teaching? So, for example, you finish teaching at 1 o'clock, and then you'd have the afternoon with the kids. How does that work if you're a teacher and a coach?
Normally, in my situation for my career, I had a full teaching schedule, and when the teaching day ended, then the coaching day started. So there really was. They might have given you the last period off, depending, but that would have given you time to prepare a little bit. But normally, yeah, full teaching full time, coaching full time. When teaching day ended, coaching day started.
And when players are finished with the high school program, where do they progress on to after that? What's their next step?
The club season would pick up. So that was the arrangement that we've always had in place, is that there wouldn't be first of all, the state rules in Missouri for sure, the state rules do not allow a player to play outside of the high school during the high school season. So they prohibit that. Yeah.
So at 16, when a player does finish, then and they're finished with high school, where do they go from there? So, for example, we have an opportunity of college here, or players might get a full-time scholarship at a football club. So players who go to college would continue to play college football, and then might go and do it at university level from after 18 onwards. So, how does that look in the US?
Yeah, our student typically graduates at age 18, and from then, now this is a two-part answer, because the first part is the way it used to be. And the pathway was always that from high school, you went to college and played. I would say over the first part of my career, I would have close to 90% of my players that would go on and play college soccer. And the second part of my career, as things kind of started changing, and in the more recent time, that 90% has switched to almost about 10 or 15%. And I think there's two-part reason there. One, because of what I said earlier in the podcast about the availability of playing college soccer becoming dominated by internationals and the free transfer rule. The kids don't really have the same opportunity today that they had back in the day. And so two things happen. The kids usually have an idea where they would like to go and where they would like to play. But in most cases, that opportunity is not going to be available to them. So what is available is a second, third, fourth choice that they may not be interested in from their own point of view. So they can't do what they'd like to do. They don't want to do what they could do. So unfortunately, they either stay with the club team, but even at that, the club team's participation drops off drastically. So we're in a situation now where kids finish high school, and unfortunately, most of them finish their soccer playing days, which is really sad, very unfortunate.
Yeah, I've spoken to a couple of professional footballers from the US game, and they say the amount of players who are so good, who go to university level or college and gain that degree. They've had a fantastic, career. You look at some of their accolades which they've achieved from a personal sense, and they say the amount of players who don't go on and continue playing. They said it is phenomenal. The degree of players who just drop off that system after all those years, and then it's great because they go on and have different careers. But the amount of players which are lost despite all those years of experience behind them, despite the talent which they have, because of the lack of opportunities further.
See, then yeah, that becomes a concern, because knowing that, how does that affect the cycle in the beginning? If parents now know that at the end of the road is different than it used to be, how does that affect the beginning of the road? So far, it doesn't seem to have any adverse effect in terms of decreased number of young players getting into the game. And I think that, there's a certain element here where there is just the fun of the game, enjoying playing the game, and how it can develop you as a person, and the socialization of it and all that stuff. But for the ones that really are serious about it and dedicate themselves and do extra training and put themselves out there and have the hunger and the ambition, that they continue on, they'll find a place to go. But unfortunately, along the way, a good number of the players lose that drive, and they're pretty content at the end of the road to say, well, that's it, done, and go on from there.
Yeah, I think that's a sad thing in terms of how many players are lost in the system, but it's good that it doesn't have that detrimental effect down through the years, which is a real positive thing to see. Now, when you talk about the Champions League program, like how much of an uptake has there been from other states and other areas? Because if there's a huge demand for pay to play, and there's a big scope where there's a lot of people who don't want to pay to play, and there's so many players missing, then you think, right, if there was a huge region in the north of America who'd be like, oh, we've heard of this program down in Tampa, we think it's a great program, why don't we invite them up, why don't they come and talk it through with us? And then you're sort of going out and setting up these programs all across America. How much of an uptake currently exists because of the work you're doing, and how much scope is there to build it even wider across the US?
Well, it started with Tampa Bay 7 years ago. St. Louis joined and became the second city involved. Florida now has two other communities involved, and between Jim and I, we both spoken with probably at least, if not more, than 20 other communities that share the same kind of interest that we do, where they see a need for their high school soccer program to be reinvigorated, and they look at the Champions League as the perfect way to do it. So, this is really the first year that we've really had any kind of outreach where we've gone out and introduced our concept to people, and they're very, very interested in it. So I would think if we have this conversation next year, our numbers will be significantly increased. And each year I see that they increase again.
And I think that's a real positive and a real testament towards work that you put in, especially when there's a big need for a program like this, because you're engaging so many different players and so many different coaches. The more that you collaborate with them, the more that you pass off your experience, the more that these programs will grow internally. Then hopefully you will overturn those barriers in terms of pay to play. You get to unlock even more players because, as you said, there's lots of little kingdoms being carved out. Now, whilst those kingdoms are being carved out and there's going to be big advocates for pay to play, and there's going to be different stakeholders who want to earn that money. Do you feel and fear that there is big opposition which may come your way to preventing you from pushing this program further because they want to ensure their coin is meat in their pocket?
Well, that's a good point, a good question. I think there's going to be more opposition and pressure put on the clubs, because I think the pay to play model is broken. It's very broken, and it's broken for two reasons, the way I see it. Number one, the very good players that have ambition and drive and have the opportunity to continue to move on are mixed in with the other kids that are okay players but don't have the same drive. So those are the guys that when it's time, they fall off, and no big deal. But at the same time, the guys that have the drive and the ambition, they're a little bit held back because they are teammates with other players who don't have the same drive. One of the concepts that the Dutch live by is that they say you got to put the best with the best and against the best. Like I said earlier, we have 4 academies in St. Louis. That's absolutely ridiculous. That's totally ridiculous. That is so misleading. And so there's 4 groups of players and parents that think their kids might be the next coming of the best player, right? When in reality, if you combined all 4 of those teams, you might get one good team out of all 4 of those. And the rest of them need to realize where they are and where their level is and be happy with it and play accordingly. So I don't know that we're going to get so much pressure. I think the clubs are going to get a little bit more pressure. I think we might be getting more support than pressure, to be honest with you.
And I think that's the interesting thing is how much more support are you going to keep growing? How many more people are going to keep getting behind you? Because the more people that do, especially coaches who are really passionate and believe in the same thing, it'll help grow this program and take it even further to overcome the opposition which you are facing and might be ahead of you.
Well, I think if we take the approach that we're not really doing this to compete against the other organizations, we're doing this just to improve our own position. I just saw a quote from, I don't know if you're familiar with Shedeur Sanders, the football guy, but he said, "I'm not here to try to prove anybody else wrong. I'm here to try to prove myself right." And I thought, boy, that's a brilliant statement. That is a brilliant statement. And that's, I think, what we're trying to do. We're trying to reinvigorate. I've used that word over and over. The level and the quality and the interest in high school soccer, not necessarily at the expense of the club organizations, but just to raise our status and raise our standards and get people back interested in what they were interested in for so many years. We dropped off a little bit, and we needed something to get us back on target and back on track. So the Champions League is absolutely the single answer we needed to get it going.
So when it comes to this pay-to-play program, right, Terry, who takes a cut of that money? Is it the U.S. governing body? Whose pockets gets lined from this?
Well, the situation has gone from parent coaches to now paid coaches, which still may very well be some of those parents. The trouble, the difficulty that I have is I don't have any trouble with people getting paid for what they do. But if you're going to get paid, you better increase your level. And I don't see enough of that where coaching education becomes a prerequisite to getting paid to coach. There's so much value in reasoning to have coaching education. I've tried over the years in my own way. I've been offered free sessions, and I had a little initial interest, and then it dropped off. And anytime that there's been any kind of a coaching education opportunity, the talk is okay, but the turnout never ever equals the talk about it. So that's an area that we really need to improve on. And if we improve the quality of coaching through coaching education, then whatever they make from it, good for them. They deserve it. They earn it. But right now, to answer your question, the money goes right to the club, and the club allocates that for expenses and for salaries. Goes right to the club.
That's quite an interesting approach when it comes down to it, in terms of how that money is generated and why the pay-to-play is so demanding, especially if that pathway is there. And you can only hope, by the sounds of your program, that representatives from the US national governing body will go, well, what a fantastic program. Why don't we deploy that more across the US? And further conversations and collaboration, which you're keen on as one of your principals. Well, it just sounds like a great opportunity. Like for me, if I was waiting for the US soccer board and I heard about your program and I knew there was a real conflict in terms of this pay to play and barriers facing players, I'd certainly want to open up a conversation with experienced coaches like yourselves who have a great standing in the game. It's not like you've just come in, you're trying to set this up, you don't really understand the way the program has worked. You're seasoned, vetted coaches who've been there, done that, and know exactly what you're doing.
Well, just think of the rationale behind pay to play. If you don't have anybody paying, nobody gets paid, right? So you have to get people playing. You have to have a degree in marketing, I think, to get people interested and involved in your program. and buy into the brand and whatever that means to different people. And that's where I think the pay to play has gone wrong also, in that it's enticing people to participate and belong for whatever reasons, and they create reasons that seem to be attractive. But at the end of the day, without being said, and nobody's going to say this, they're doing it to raise their revenue so they can cover their costs. The more teams they have, more players they have, more pay they're getting, and more for the club. Simple as that. It's not about quality. It's about quantity.
I think that's the biggest shame is what you say there. It's not about that quality, especially when you're playing with people's lives here. And there might be a one-shot opportunity for some kids. They've gone through this program, they've been supported, then suddenly they've been cut off because they can no longer afford it, or they're no longer seen as important asset anymore. They've just become a bit of a commodity. So it's a shame when you play with the morality and the ethics of people's lives, especially young kids in this process.
I have a soon-to-be 3-year-old great grandson. Okay, he's currently 2 years old. He's in a program already with one of the clubs, and they're paying for this kid to have some soccer training. Some of it's okay, but they had a four versus four league where they're using field hockey goals. If you know what field hockey goals are,
Yep.
They're narrow and tall, and not low and wide. For these little tiny kids to run up and down a quarter of the field, one guy dribbles, kicks the ball somewhere, and everybody else watches him, right? And they're paying for that. And that's the club thinking they're doing some good to develop some young players. Shame on them.
Yeah, we see similar things in terms of some private academies and coaching centres which take place, and they're very much there to earn money. They're a business. They've seen an opportunity where they're plugging the gap if maybe where there's a lack of an academy system or where there's demand for this, and they're stockpiling players and they're getting them in. They're charging 30, 40 quid a month, and they're just there to do some very basic stuff. Now, some academies do some great extra coaching around club football and really enhance players and get them up to academy. So that regulation is a real debate in terms of what is seen across Wales and England. But I've seen similar things in terms of these private coaching centres where they don't really deploy the needs dependent on the players or meet the needs, and they just use the equipment which is there, and they don't have a care for the player in the process because it's that money making scheme.
Let me give you two examples here. One is again the Dutch model. I've been over there enough and met enough contacts to know what I'm saying is true. Every little village, I think they have 3,000 clubs over there in Holland, a tiny little small country like that. And in most of the clubs, amateur clubs now I'm talking about, amateur clubs that are in the different little villages and communities, they usually have two people in the club that are on part-time salary. In other words, they have full-time jobs and they do this on the side. And one would be like the president of the club, and the one would be the director of coaching. And those are the only two people that are getting paid. And the second example is Tom Byer, who you may or may not know. Tom is an American in Japan that has a program called Football Starts at Home. And he starts with 2-year-olds, but he does it in the home with a parent with a size 1 ball. And he does ball mastery, ball manipulation. And nobody's getting paid for that. My little great grandson, he's 2 years old. They're paying somebody to do something with him, but Tom Byer's program is widely accepted. He as an individual is probably one of the more in-demand soccer people right now in the world. This program, he basically put Japan soccer on the map, because this program has been around for enough years that he's developed these kinds of players. Their men and women's programs are widely recognized now as being challenging countries and whatnot. And he's been doing this kind of program for years. No charge. Everybody does it for free. Kids are developing, learning the game on their own terms.
That's such an interesting concept and program, and I like the phrase "football starts at home." And looking at how they get players started, especially from a young age, in sort of what might be the opposite of what we see in terms of charging for those little coaching centers and the high cost which goes with them, because these families think that they're receiving something. Now, Terry, the great thing is that what I read about you and what I know is that you were at one school, right, for 53 years, which is an incredible amount of time to be in one organization. Now, when I worked at a school a few years ago, there was one teacher who retired and she was there 37 years. And I thought that was an incredible amount of time. But yet I'm talking to someone who was there 16 years longer than here, right? How did you get to spend 53 years in one organization?
Well, two reasons. One, they didn't bother me too much. And two, it's where I wanted to be. I actually went to school there myself, and I left with the idea that I wanted to come back. And it was a well-established program when I came back to. I was part of it for 4 years as a player, so I knew I knew the history of it. And when I came back, I considered myself to be the keeper of the castle. I just had to maintain as best I could. I had to try to maintain the standard. And I said earlier, was blessed to have talented players with high ambition, and we had success. And like I said, too, nobody bothered me. I mean, I didn't, I stayed in line. I behaved myself, got some results. Kids got better, got scholarships, and it was all good. It was all good. I had no idea, no desire to go anywhere else. I was right.
Now, as a teacher myself, you can see the years which fly by, right? And you can see how great things can be when you're teaching and you're really in the mix of it. And you can completely understand how quickly time flies. And when you speak to teachers who say, oh, I've been here 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, then I completely understand, because once they're engrossed in something, they have an environment which they love to be in, and they got kids which they enjoy teaching, and there's good programs. You understand why the years fly by. So 53 years has absolutely flown by, especially with that amount of commitment and that affinity, especially going from student to teacher / coach yourself. And it's incredible to have been there for that amount of time and to have that pride. And being a student to being a teacher, you get to instill that pride from that transition yourself, and get to see that in the students as they become students on their own journey themselves. And then perhaps you might see those who were students become teachers, and that incredible sort of nature of life continue to evolve around you as a teacher / a person / a coach, right?
Oh, absolutely. You hit that nail right on the head there. That's for sure. That is for sure. I got to a point in the classroom where I never looked at the kid as a 14 or 15-year-old kid anymore. I looked at him 10, 15 years down the road. I haven't seen so many guys that I questioned how they were ever going to manage to find their way out of the door and out of the room. Now taking as adults, they're very successful in business or whatever career they're in. So I quit looking at that 14 and 15-year-old kid. I looked at it beyond that, and that was really an important moment for me in my teaching career, for sure. And the coaching, I did have a lot of father-son combinations too. So, that was kind of unfortunate for the kid, because I always compared him to his dad.
I've worked with a few teachers, and I've been sat in the classroom, and they've said to the kids as they've come in year 7, they've been like, I taught your parent. And that is a real point. And I know one day I'm going to get to that point myself as well, right? And I think it's, incredible when you get to see those different sets come through, and you get to see the dad, who was a young kid himself sat in front of you, now suddenly a parent themselves. And, that what they've generated is now sat in front of you as a young person. That is a whole, interesting concept, which is really fascinating. And they get to have that incredible time where his dad might have talked about you as this great teacher, and then he might have just had you for 1 year, whereas his dad had you for 5, because he was younger then and still ready to teach, whereas he's been very lucky to have you for that long period as well, like his dad, because you didn't retire, and had those years ahead of you. Because when you come across a great teacher, like, oh, I don't want to retire, I don't want to leave, but those kids were lucky in that process as well, right? But the incredible thing alongside that is when you've coached up to 1,500 games as well, which is an incredible amount of games to coach. It's that testimony towards your commitment to the game is, how'd you get to 1,500? How'd you, get to manage so many games in a high school program for the longevity of time, right? And how many coaches look up to you and want to be in that position themselves? And, it's as you said about motivation and maintaining it. When you get to like game 800, then 900, then 1,000, how did you maintain that motivation for 1,500 games, right?
Well, I never counted. I never counted them. As a coach, you always look forward to the next game. So I was only ever looking forward to one game at a time. I never looked back. now that I'm done, I can look back, but I never looked back when I was involved, because there was too much responsibility of looking ahead. So, and I wasn't looking ahead to count off. I was looking ahead to be prepared. So I consider myself to be a lifelong learner, and I try to learn something every day from somewhere or other. And so I'm kind of like an open book, I still got some blank pages that I got to fill in. So I never looked at it as a challenge. I was never bored with it. I was never looking away. I guess I just, luckily for me, I was focused on what I was doing. It was working for me, and I enjoyed it. I honestly can say I enjoyed it.
Thing in terms of what you're saying there was that you never counted the games, that you just took it as each game came, and it's that amazing thing of when you start your first game, you didn't know the next sort of 1,500 would be there, right?
Right.
And I suppose the incredible thing, which it depends on how you feel and how you look at it, is whether you don't know when your last game was, and you didn't know whether game 1506 was your last, and you wish you could have that 1,500 all over again, and have that process or another 1,500. But the incredible thing is that you're doing these great things. You have these next programs, which is fascinating.
I was always chasing a standard, I always wanted to coach the perfect game, or have the perfect practice, or develop the perfect player. So there's always something that you could improve on. And I was always wanting to be, a better coach. So it was always a learning process for me. How could I improve what I'm doing? And I still look to that. I mean, that's still a part of me.
I liked what you said earlier about passing that knowledge on, but going away and having to improve as coaches to continue to benefit the players. I really loved the way that you said that, and I've really noted that down, because that's something which I really try to find within myself. But I like the way that you bring that across, and that continuous journey in terms of adapting and creating new programs and setting players up, and looking at a Dutch way, which was over 20 years ago, and looking at 4v4, and looking at the high school formats and working, and that collaboration is again fantastic in terms of what you're bringing across and how you do that. Now, Terry, the whole purpose of what Jim coming on tonight and introducing myself to you was to talk to you about the Unsung Heroes, right, series, which you really are one of those unsung heroes, and it's to talk about your life and where you're at, and we've done a lot of that tonight, and I'm really fond of that, and we've really been able to talk about those contemporary programs in terms of the Champions League program, right? But there's a major part of your life which over the last few years has impacted you, and it's changed maybe the way that you've had an outlook on life. It's changed the way that you coach, changed the way that you live, right? And it's been quite significant, because if I'm correct from what I've done at reading, it was in 2023 where you had an unfortunate fall in the shower, and from there then you had an infection in your leg which led to amputation. Now, this whole experience was something which would have been very demanding, very testing on you physically, mentally, missing out connecting to your players, but you wanted to get back to coaching straight away. And here you are still doing coaching, despite, another challenge in your life, despite these health issues. And again, that's a testament to who you are as a person. But this whole experience, did it completely change your perspective on life because of what you went through?
I think it has to. I don't think I could say that it didn't. Because I had two options. When in the beginning of all that, when I was in a situation where I had an 18-hour period where I don't remember, because I was under a medical condition, and I was taken to a hospital for an examination and sent to another hospital. When I woke up, the first recollection I have was a team of doctors telling me that I have an infection in my leg, and my choices are life or limb. Take your pick, okay? So, easy choice. So I chose the limb. Take the limb. Let me live. Take the limb. So the next morning, I woke up without the leg, took it off above the knee, and I decided then the simple solution for me was it's not going to come back. That's for sure. So what's the alternative option? Well, carry on, do the best you can in any way that you can. So I went through a lot of therapy, obviously, and the guiding light for the therapy was I want to get back to coaching. I told the therapist every day, I'm here to get back to coaching. That's what I want to do. And, they got me to where I could get back. So yeah, it's definitely a life lesson. But I'm in a facility, a rehab facility, an extended care facility, and I tell you what, I'm one of the lucky ones. I've seen people in my community here now that are way worse off with conditions than I am. So I'm fortunate that I'm going to be 78 years old in a couple of weeks. Fortunate for the career that I had and the opportunity that I still have. And right now, I look at myself. We talked about retirement earlier, right? So in my retirement, I realized that I have a ton of information at my disposal. I have articles, I have PowerPoints, I have this, that, and everything else. Not going to do me very much good personally, individually. So thanks to you and other people like you that give me an opportunity to be on a podcast, where I can every once in a while share something, I'm more than willing to do that. So yeah, so my function now is to maybe be a consultant. I've been asked to help a couple of local teams now. We're doing video analysis, watching their games and giving reports back to them. And I'm going to do a Zoom coaching session this summer for the high school coaches in the state of Missouri. And my topic is going to be standards, because I'm a big believer in the value of standards, not rules. Standards are what it's really all about. That's what you're chasing. You're chasing standards all the time.
I like the way that you talk about standards, not rules, that you're always chasing standards, right? What are your standards? What did you hold your players accountable to?
Boy, oh boy. Well, one of the standards was I always expected them to have a soccer behavior about them, and I said, "Don't be a cone. Don't be a cone. Cones just stand around, right? Soccer behavior, you're getting involved in. You're involved in it all the time." I'm a big fan of Tovo. I don't know if you're aware of Tovo. Todd Dean from Barcelona, with son-in-law of Johan Cruyff. The 3 C's of Tovo: cognition, competence, and character. And that's a great summary right there of what a player is all about. The intelligence of a player, the action of the player, and the reaction of the player. Cognition, competence, and character. So yeah, I was a big believer in attention to detail. That was one of my standards. Little things make a big difference, right? Mentally, be into the activity. But again, I think most importantly is the attention to detail and how little things make differences. And don't let little things get away from you, because then all of a sudden you got a big mess on your hands.
I like what you say there about don't let the little things slip away, right? And always looking for those standards, and the way that you hold your players accountable towards that, and the way that you've always set standards for yourself, the way that you always want to keep improving and learning. There's some of the real testaments in terms of what I've taken away, and something which, even when you were hit with your health condition, you could have easily turned around and said, you know what, no, this is the time where I'm going to take a break from soccer altogether. I'm going to completely finish. I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to look at life in a different way. But you haven't, and yet you're still here. And I think that mindset is absolutely key. And I think it comes across when you work with your players, and that is even reinforced here in terms of your soccer behavior. And even when you talk about don't be a cone, right? I think that's really important. And I like the way that you've talked about that. And it's a great thing which I've wrote down and something that I want to take away with me. But Tovo is something which I've definitely come across before in a great conversation with Coach Frank Carosa, which you might know him from LBV or LV high school, right? And Todd Bean talks about these and those cognition, competition, and character. For me, cognition and character are two of the great concepts which really look at how we develop players, the way that they have that intrinsic motivation, and how they look at how they want to develop in that program and take it beyond in terms of what they're doing. But the competence to do that consistently and maintaining those standards whilst continuously learning, I think sets you out in terms of your charisma, in terms of your characteristics, in terms of how much you want it compared to other players, the standards which you're willing to go ahead. And sometimes you might see this from the players where they promote themselves on Twitter and, trying to get other coaches to look at them and try and secure their places. And I think competence is massive in between that. And then cognition will fit into their soccer IQ. So it's all really interesting in terms of how you manage those players and that when it comes down to those personalities, their growth, their high score, the impacts on them, relationships, not getting selected, rejection, their own personal growth, their motivations, wanting to study, wanting to go out. And there's so much which comes into play when coaching these players. You would have seen every different contrast of player in terms of their motivation, their personality, their rejections, their responses. And I think that when it comes down to a player and their own cognition, is the real character which they have is when they get rejected, how they respond to that rejection.
Well, Luca, you couldn't have said it better, man. Of the 3 C's, I think character is the one that separates the ones that have it and the ones that don't. I mean, competence, a lot of people can have the competence, and they can look good in how they play. They might have the intelligence about how to play, but they might give it all back with bad character. I mean, that's such a critically important component. And unfortunately, I mean, that's another one of those attention to detail little things. If you let people get away with it early on, they get used to thinking that that's okay, and that's going to be their pattern of behavior. If you correct it, then you got a chance to save them. Because at the end of the day, I think that's the single most important difference between the players that make it and the players that don't, is their character.
Massively, and I think that's the difference between what sets them out and what doesn't. We've had such a great conversation over the last hour 40 minutes, right? Where we've been able to talk about your experiences as a teacher, as a coach. And I just want to ask you one more question in terms of what separates coaching and teaching, and how different and how alike are they in the same context?
I think that's an advantage that the high school program has, because coaching is teaching. And teaching is an incredible task. One of the big things in my coaching philosophy is observation. An observation involves a number of things. You got to know what you're looking at and what you're looking for. And you can get 10 people watching the same thing, and I'd be surprised if you get 2 or 3 people that see it the same way. It's so subjective also, but observation is huge. And then planning, and then teaching. It's all about teaching, because you do the same thing when you're coaching. You organize, you plan, you do it, you evaluate it, you change it, you correct it. You work off your feedback. Was it good, bad? Did it work? What could have been different about it? I don't think you can separate them, to be honest with you. And I think another credit for the high school coach. And here again, if the coaching education component is not part of the club structure, the coaches are missing out. And because you were a good player has no bearing on whether you're going to be a good coach. I mean, it might work out, but look at some of the great coaches in our era that weren't good players. They were good coaches because they had different qualities about them that allowed them to be good coaches. Look at some of the great players that turned out to be flops as coaches, So I think teaching and coaching go hand in hand. And when you don't have an opportunity to learn as a teacher to be a coach, I think you got to find a way to get that. And that's where coaching education comes in.
What a fantastic way to talk about coaching and coach development and what they're missing out on, and some of the key messages which coaches must really focus on, a part of their reflection from listening to your episode when this does get released, and what they are able to take away from you, because I've taken away so much from you, and I also took away much from Jim when he was on the call, and it was interesting to really explore the high school program in a little bit more detail and and have that understanding about it, so I could understand the complexities in terms of what coaches do face it, and what impacts their players, and how it might come down to their different coaching, their different management, the future of the programs which is being instilled, those different influences, the continued exploration of the pay to play programs and the lack of opportunities, and the way that you talk about different diversity and the different movements in terms of individuals and demographics and geographical regions, and how that's impacting players and the quality of systems. The fact that you got standards and not rules, what you talk about there in terms of TOVO, when you look at your relationship with players, how you built your relationship with Jim then, later on in your life, and how you're utilizing your time which you have available now to really channel a successful program and grow it in the potential that it has and where it may be this time next year, for example. And even when you break down in terms of quality, that different types of quantity, the different argument of the Champions League being bigger than the World Cup and being one of the arguments for an inspiration behind what you're doing now, the 5 principles which you carry, the underrepresented. There is so much in this episode that you've talked about, Terry, and which Jim touched upon, which I've truly been taken back by in terms of when you talk about the purpose of the program and enhancing players, and how you've worked in collaboration and how you're continuing to support communities and programs. There is been so fascinating, and the more that I've listened to some of the links that Jim has sent me and the different interviews and the different articles which I've read, it's really blown my mind, and I really hope that more coaches across the US buy into this program and look at the benefits for their own geographical regions and high schools, because I think there's so much there to offer. But Terry, I really appreciate your time this afternoon, this evening, and it's been great to finally meet you and talk to you and really be able to sit back and listen to you, as well as Jim, and your time has been really appreciated, and it's a big thank you from me.
Look, you've been brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I really like how you take notes and pay attention and take it to heart. It's awesome. I have one last closing comment for you. You put this one in your pipe and smoke it too. Cruyff says soccer is a simple game, but the hardest thing to do is to play simple soccer. That's a typical Cruyffism. He's always contradictory.
God, I love it.
When I watch games now, I really see it. I mean, I see how we do so much to complicate play because we want to do too much that it doesn't need to be done. What's the simplest way to play and still be effective? It's always there. It's always there. It's just a matter, I guess it's the cognition, being able to see it and experience it and express it. The doing it's the easy part once you see it, but you got to see it first. Soccer is a simple game, but the hardest thing to do is to play simple soccer. Amen. Hey, this has been. Look, I really appreciate it. I really do.
What a way for you to finish off a fantastic episode with that quote there, Terry. And I've appreciated your time, and I thank you for the kind words, honestly. And I really hope that this time next year we can have this conversation again, and see how much the program has grown even further. But I wish you the best of luck with everything. I wish you the best of health. And again, it's a big thank you from me, mate.
Thank you, sir. I consider you to be a friend of mine now. Soccer friend for life.
Always. It's a pleasure, Terry. I take care, my friend.
Thank you, sir. Have a good one.
Thank you. And you.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Cheerio.
But yeah, we try to be that group that can help be there for the players as a 3, because I think you mentioned earlier, you want to have different characters in the changing room. You want to have different personalities. You don't want the same kind of people, because you're not going to be able to move forward. If you've got 10 people and they all agree the same things, you're going to get to a point in time where actually you're going to become unstuck. You need that one person to actually be like, nah, I don't agree with that. Or actually, we should try this. And I think that's why the huddle works, is we're all quite different as human beings. And I think you need 3 different people in there, because some players will naturally gravitate towards me and my personality, but equally some might go to the other 2, and that's absolutely fine.